It seems that when I became a man, I put away childish things is a valuable phrase in the Bible. The question can be, what are childish things? Faith and fantasy, both of those existences can be considered such. Faith is based on doctrine, and a doctrine that when one follows, their behavior and their attitudes are affected by that doctrine. That doctrine directs them in how to behave. It directs them in their perception. It directs them in their attitude toward matters. The doctrine of this faith shapes the perceptions, I'll just say, of and behaviors of a person. So, because of the doctrine of the faith, I'm held back from beating down a person in anger because the doctrine of the faith is against that. Because of the doctrine of the faith, I don't impregnate 3, 4 different women because the doctrine of the faith, the teaching of the faith, does not support that and actually goes against that idea. Because of the doctrine of the faith, I may be held back from doing things that hurt someone else for the benefit of me. I'm held back from, I guess, natural inclinations that are part of the human condition. I'm held back from those things because of the doctrine, the teaching of the faith. Once I stop believing the doctrine of the faith, once I lose the faith, I lose the benefits of the faith, which might be self-control, which might be not encountering unnecessary stress because I was saved by the doctrine of the faith. The doctrine held me back from doing the things that bring those things. So though the doctrine may not be based on reality, it may not be based on truth, there were benefits to the faith that I lose when I lose the faith. So the benefits are not based on whether the doctrine is true or not. Truth is not the requirement. The perception, however, shapes one's perception. The doctrine shapes one's perception and one's behavior. And there are benefits to believing the faith, to having the faith, believing the doctrine, because it holds us back from certain things that can hurt us. However, or yet, and still, as they say, we gain freedom in place of the faith. So now that I don't have the faith, I am free to those natural inclinations that are part of the human condition. I am sexually free where I felt sexually limited in the faith. I am free to express my anger where I felt unrighteous to express my anger in the faith. So there are benefits that I may lose, but there's freedom that I gain when it comes to faith. Out of faith going into fantasy, we are domesticated in some type of culture. And it gives us fantasy about things. And the fantasy has benefits. The excitement of a fantasy feels fantastic. So if I have a fantasy that marriage is thus and so, I am excited about marriage. If I have the fantasy that love does thus and so, then that is the excitement of love for me. And I'll just stop there with those two examples. Once I find out that marriage is not thus and so, I have lost the fantasy. So now I'm not after marriage the way I was because I just found out, or I have learned, or I've been enlightened that it is not the thus and so of the fantasy. Once I find out that love is not thus and so, then my my crave for that idea of love is no more. That was a fantasy. And the thing is, what makes a fantasy so is that it's not reality. However, we have been domesticated to the point of going after fantasies, which means a lot of us don't live in reality, which is why we don't acquire a lot, because we're going after that which doesn't exist. It's a fantasy. And that fantasy is supported by others who want the fantasy. And sometimes we want the fantasy so bad that we will not allow it to be a fantasy. We choose to call it reality, and we keep trying to force reality out of fantasy, but you can't squeeze reality out of fantasy because fantasy means there is no reality to it. So there's no reality in there, which makes it fantasy. So I lose the benefits of the fantasy. I lose the feeling that comes with the fantasy. At the same time, I gain the freedom to live in what's real. And then it helps me because now I can go after what I can have rather than continuing to go after what doesn't exist. I know there's an idea of make your fantasy reality. Well, if it is reality, it's not a fantasy. It's a possibility. It's not a fantasy. It's an opportunity. So the point of this rhetoric is to say that there is benefit and loss to being a part of religion. I don't want to say religion, I say faith. Faith. Religious faith, that is. And fantasy. So it's for one to determine the value of what we gain and what we lose by partaking in either. But there is gain and loss. I am interested in freedom. I would rather my, what we would call fantasy, to be based on reality. In other words, I'm not so much interested in fantasy. I'm interested in possibility that matches my desires. I don't want to feel like I have to cheat on myself. For instance, we call what I call stepping out of a relationship. We call it cheating on the person we're in the relationship with. I feel that for men in particular, I can't speak all the way for women because I'm not one, nor do I desire to be. So understanding my manhood, which seems to be so similar to most manhood around the world, manhood, seems to be demonized in a lot of places. So we say that we're cheating on the other person. But I do believe that we're cheating on us. When it comes to monogamy, to partake in monogamy for most men is to cheat on ourselves, because what we'd be doing is suppressing our nature, in other words, the way God made us, for the sake of being a part of the monogamous culture, the culture of monogamy. If that culture is not based on God, in other words, if that culture does not support what's divine, what God has done, what's organic, then we would be cheating on ourselves because we're suppressing ourselves, so we could be a part of something that is other than what we are. So that's just an example. I'm not saying to do it or not do it, but that is what's up, and I'm interested in freedom. And for each person, that is what it is. But when I say freedom, I'm saying the freedom to be you, the freedom to be me, the freedom to be comfortable as one is, as long as it is not unjustly hurting someone else, and unjust being intentional, undeserved hurt toward another person. But yeah, that's what's up. I feel no apology about choosing freedom. Even the Bible says where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. You know, there's freeness. That's not a word, but I'm making it up right now. Anyway, so let me wrap it up. This is just, my ideas that I'd like to share in case it is any enlightenment for anyone else, that there are benefits and losses to faith and religion that is not necessarily based on truth, but there is benefit to believing it. There's benefit to thinking it. There's also losses to believing it and thinking it. That's up to all of us individually to decide. But at the end of the day, and the beginning and the middle, for me, I always choose freedom. And I would rather learn so I could be wise with my freedom. And also, I would like my freedom to be authentic to me. My freedom is not based on what makes you free. It's based on what makes me free. And so I would like my freedom to be authentic. It's based on me. We are taught to demonize ourselves. Everything about us is wrong. Everything about being a man is just wrong and immoral and against God. That's interesting because God did it, didn't it? So maybe we ought to question what is divine, what is organic, or organic, as I said earlier. You know, maybe we ought to question that because maybe our ideas of what's right and wrong is wrong. Maybe we need to question some of that. But of course, when we want to be in the faith and we want to be part of the fantasy, then the idea is to not question because it's already been answered for us by someone. I don't believe that anyone has more intelligent capacity than I do to experience God and to see the God that I live. We all seek to understand it better by and by. But I'll choose the freedom to get that understanding rather than to go off somebody else's. Well, that's my rhetoric on this one.